And we are live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder here for the Fantasy Football Fanalysts. And tonight, we have a very special guest joining us as we cover the FFPC high-stakes drafts, player selection, roster construction, position theory, planning playoff schedules, plus more. Our guest is the first ever back-to-back champion in the FFPC Fantasy Football Guys Championship. He is the director of Texas Allergy and Sinus Center and our Rhinology School-based surgeon. Some may call him the $750,000 man. Others call him the greatest FFPC player of all time. On Twitter, he is known as @Skywalker2000, but the rest of the world calls him Dr. Abib Agbeotaba. Well, Abib, welcome to the show. How's your night going, and how have you celebrated this godly win?
In terms of celebration, I don't think I've gotten there just quite yet. Unfortunately, COVID has not allowed me to partake in the celebration just yet. But day's going well. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I had a day off today, first in a very long time. So it was nice, kind of catching up, being able to run normal errands and just kind of taking the day slow. Just got back from the gym. So I'm pumped and excited and ready to do this podcast.
So what does a back-to-back champion do for fun outside of fantasy football? Like, I have to imagine, just for the casual fanalists like us, like, it takes up a lot of our time. And I don't know, have a lot of outside things. What do you do for fun?
That's a good question. Honestly, between managing the amount of teams that I managed this year and work, there's really not a lot of free time. So if I can, find something to do, it's, playing some basketball, playing some ball with friends, traveling, when we can travel, going out to eat. I'm kind of a foodie, so I love, going out to restaurants and trying new things, watching movies, watching TV shows. I just basically try to fit in what I can fit in. I'm not getting much sleep these days, but, I'll worry about that, I guess, when I'm dead.
Fair enough. Billy, I don't know if you want to introduce Abib to any of your I know that Billy's really into food too, so I don't know if there's anything y'all want to share with each other, but
Oh man, yeah. So I actually went to culinary school, and I started off in the restaurant business, and then lo and behold, now I'm at a grocery store. And I guess they go hand in hand. People come in, they'll ask me, "Hey, do you have the hollandaise sauce packets?" I'm like, "No, just make it. It's easy." They're like, "No, I just want the packet." And I'm like, "No, I don't have the packet. Sorry." But I absolutely love food too. I'm a foodie and I'm a wino. Love eating out with the wife when we can, when COVID is not around, of course. Yeah, food and fantasy football, I guess, all the F's here, and wine and friends. So how long ago did you get into fantasy football, and how?
So I started playing fantasy when I was in college. I was never really a huge NFL football guy. I love playing the sport. Played in high school and would play in intramurals and during college, but in terms of fantasy and really kind of understanding the game, I was, very much a novice and had very little knowledge on really what the game was about. And so I played with some close buddies of mine. And like most of us, when you start playing fantasy for the first time, you suck. You're not very good. And your friends and other league mates like to let you know about it and like to let you hear about it. So being, the competitive person that I am, you get tired of it. You get tired of being at the bottom basement of the league. And so you do everything you can to work and fight your way up. So me kind of, learning what I could learn and becoming a better player. And that process was really mostly predicated on just not wanting to suck and wanting to be able to, talk a little shit on my own. So, it kind of started there, and this league was just very intense. It was just one of those intense leagues, and I still play in this league till this day. Longhorn Fantasy Football League. I'm a UT fan, obviously, but it's 12 guys that are just very intense, very knowledgeable, well, not all, but most. And year in, year out, it's a battle. We have a trophy and a championship belt that we pass around. We meet up for the drafts every year. So it's just, it's just one of those things. It's just a great time, a great group of friends. And, it really kind of, was born from that. And then I kind of reached a point where I found myself spending so much time invested in researching and trying to do draft prep that I realized that I should probably, maybe put this towards something else, spending a little bit too much time on just one league. And so I didn't really want to cut back on the prep because I didn't want to lose, obviously, but I figured, why not, try out some other formats. And I think a couple of years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I tried FFPC for the first time. And that's what really got me introduced to high stakes, and the rest is kind of history from there.
So wait, let me get this straight. You tried FFPC for the first time 2 or 3 years ago, and you've won 2 years in a row? That's outstanding, by the way.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe don't quote me on that. I want to say it was 2 or 3 years.
That's a pretty good win percentage.
The year before is when I really started to invest a lot of time. I know I played the year before that, so I think it's definitely been at least 3 years.
That's been phenomenal.
The first year I got in. I mean, I don't think I had made the playoffs, and I was probably bottom of the league. So it was a good learning experience because it's a new format. It's actually one of my favorite formats to play in, and so it takes some time to sort of kind of get used and get adjusted and acclimated to the league settings and the draft itself and just the overall contest and tournament. But yeah, I mean, I think the last 2 years is sort of kind of when I really decided to invest a lot of time, money, and energy into the tournament itself.
So you mentioned your Friends League and how long you've been in it. If you're like me, does that Friends League sometimes mean more to you than these high stakes leagues because it's pride?
Yes. People think I'm joking, but I mean, obviously, winning that amount of money, you can't. I'll take that. But I came in second place this year. Okay. And it's one of these leagues. So we literally have probably one of the best commissioners in the world. Carl Reed, sorry to give shout outs, but he's like literally one of the best commissioners in the world. So he keeps stats. Okay. These stats date back to the inception of the league. So your winning percentage, how many times you've won a championship, and this trophy
that's awesome
has your name on the title. Okay. So we're reaching sort of kind of a critical point where, if I played him in the championship, if he won, he was going to have more, championships than I did. And if I won, I think I was going to tie him or at least, pass him. And of course he won. And it was funny leading up to that night. We were both kind of joking that, I was like, I'll be okay if you win the league, yet I win the FFPC. Like, I'll be okay with it. When it was all said and done, I was not very happy about losing the league, to say the least. But yeah, it's a great league. This year has been, obviously, awesome all around. So
you won a lot of money from this. What was something that you bought with the winnings either last year or this year? Like, is there like one thing that like sticks out to you with that prize money? Honestly, no.
I didn't really kind of take the money and spend it on anything big. I'm kind of growing into a watch guy. I brought a Breitling, but other than that, nothing major. Honestly, this time around, one of the things that kind of I felt the best about as far as what I spent the winnings on was being able to give some back to some of my family members. My dad, who's helped me out tremendously throughout the years. My mom, who's like an extremely hard worker, continues to work. She's a nurse. Has been working, throughout the COVID process. Anytime they call her up for a shift, she's the first one there. So being able to kind of give some money back to them, and they're so prideful and proud that they didn't even want to accept it. I had to literally force it, upon them. So that's probably the greatest thing I think that I can probably think of as far as where the money's gone. The rest is just kind of investments, and I almost ignore that it's there, to be honest.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned that you've been playing FFPC for a few years now, which was one of my next questions. But outside the FFPC, are there any other platforms that you enjoy playing on?
I think FFPC is probably, top tier for me. I did the NFFC last year, and I think I did pretty well. I didn't, make any noise in the large field tournament. But when I started this year, I knew I was going to be doing a lot more teams just because I carried over quite a bit of credit from last year. And going back and forth between the formats, I learned last year that was tough to do when managing that many teams. And unfortunately, I just don't have the time and don't have the smarts to be able to kind of go back and forth and really understanding your format in a variety of ways. It's not just the draft itself. It's not just setting up lineups, but it really kind of comes down to ad drops and how you construct your lineups and things like that. You really got to be, locked into your league settings to understand or to be able to, I think, to succeed in any league format. So this year, I really just kind of dedicated it to FFPC. But I think NFFC does a great job. I mean, those to me are, two of the top tier high stakes leagues. If I were going to, recommend joining any sites, it would definitely be those two to start off with.
I agree. And do you do any offline drafts, or are you primarily on the online drafts?
Primarily online drafts, except when I'm drafting with my, my friends and buddies. Yeah, I try to do it in person as much as possible, just because I feel like that's just the greatest experience.
It truly is. We talk about offline drafts all the time and getting together and the traditions that you have in those leagues. Yeah. And some of the traditions that I've really enjoyed were if somebody tries to draft a player who's already been drafted, they immediately have to drink a beer or take a shot. And you notice their draft progressively get worse as they continue to take somebody who's already been drafted. But it's those type of traditions that really bring fantasy football to the forefront of people's lives and really kind of invoke the friendships that come along with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, don't drink and draft.
So do you play any DFS at all? Do you play any DFS?
I do. For me, DFS is mostly just kind of scratching an itch. Like I just can't, again, it's kind of one of those things where I spend a lot of time kind of prepping for, setting my lineups and, start sits and things of that nature that I feel like I should probably, spend a little bit of, coin in the DFS realm, but it's a very little amount, to kind of give out numbers. Like I put in $100 at the beginning of the year and, had some good winnings, but nothing major. So I'll play a couple of single entry, low amount tournaments or low vol, at a real low volume. And then I'll play like, 1 to 2 50-50s just to sort of kind of keep a bankroll going. And what I'll find is that I'll usually be able to kind of, 6-7x my money. This year, I think I had like 8x, but then I get in the NBA season and I quickly lose all that. So it's so there's not much winnings in DFS. Actually, I think what started me in the high stakes was one of the first times I played DFS. I joined a FanDuel contest, and I was like number one in like the large field tournament. And I remember we were going into Monday night, and I had a fairly hefty lead. And Darren Sproles had the game of his life on a Monday night. It was like insane. I think he scored like 3 touchdowns, like over 150 yards or something like that. And I dropped from first to like, I don't know, whatever. And it was a $10,000 payout. And this is like one of my first times playing DFS. So of course you think, oh, this is easy, Since then, I've never had, I don't think I've ever had a, any winnings of that amount. So it's DFS, I think, is a completely different game. And you really need to be, understand the ins and outs to be able to win and take on that challenge.
So do you watch like the NFL games regularly, or is it just like when you can, or not at all?
For me, I mean, that's really where it all kind of comes down to. It's watching the games. I mean, I feel like if I weren't watching the actual games, I would not have a leg up, on the competition. I would not have a way of kind of differentiating myself from the next man, because I'm someone, I kind of live, eat, sleep football. I wake up in the morning, I'm listening to podcasts, listening to Sirius XM, NFL, and fantasy radio. I subscribe to pretty much every major site. I'm on Twitter or been on Twitter like last year. So I'm trying to take in as much information as possible. But it's the watching the game for me that allows me to kind of decipher what's real and what's not, what's applicable and what's not. And it allows me to be able to, for instance, a guy like Logan Thomas, to be able to, see his first game going off, to be able to understand, okay, based on kind of what I saw, based on all the research that I've done, I can feel comfortable inserting him in my lineup because I know that he's a legit player versus someone else who may randomly go off. And if I'm just looking at the box score, I'm sort of kind of hoping and guessing whether or not he's going to be able to come through in my lineup on a given week.
So Bradley's smiling over here because Logan Thomas was one of his original deep cuts of the week on our podcast. Was it week one, pre-week one? I think it was.
So you mentioned after week one, whether he was legit or not. And I went on a 2 or 3 minute rant on just how legit Logan Thomas was. And I picked him up in just about every league that I could because I believed in him and the talent and what I saw. And so I'm glad you spoke to that because, there's an extra level of belief of not just looking at the data, but also looking at the film too. And I know that Billy, he watches a lot of film. I do a lot of the numbers. And so that's like the Fanalists in us. That's where we got our name too. So
yeah. So for me, I'd say this year was probably, I used to watch every single game every single week. And not only would I watch every game, but then I'd go through and watch the coach's film and watch it from the different angles to see how the defense reacted. Did they, was there a break in coverage? What happened? Break down the play as much as you can. And I feel like that's what separated me in terms of fantasy knowledge and it's really helped me progress, touching base on what you had just mentioned, kind of piggybacking. But I can't stress it enough. There's numbers and then there's film, and being able to break down tape and watch it and see it with your own eyes and really be able to say, this kid's going to be special. And I think that's really going to help people make the leap here. And a few podcasts ago, we touched base on Alvin Kamara when he came out of college. And I was extremely high on Alvin Kamara. And I was in a FFPC high stakes dynasty league. I think it was a 2,500 league. And I needed a tight end. And this was O.J. Howard's rookie year as well. And guess who was on the board when I came up was O.J. Howard. But I'm sitting there staring at Alvin Kamara. And I just couldn't get over watching him in college and watching his film, how he moved, how fluid he was, his quick twitch, and then seeing the team he landed on. And I reached a full round early, if not more. But I didn't have a round two. And so I had to make the leap of faith, and I took him. And I remember getting made fun of for like weeks because I reached for Alvin Kamara. But you just know when you see in film if somebody has it, if they don't have it.
Yeah, you can't replace it. I mean, I'll bring up a good example, and this is going to kind of sound odd, but Marquis Brown. I mean, many of us were probably high on him going into the year, assuming that he was going to take that next step. And obviously he disappointed when it counted. But if you look at the box score over the last, few weeks, and let's exclude the playoff game, you look at the box score, he's performed tremendously, right? But if you look at the actual film, for me personally, there was still quite a bit of pause where I was just like, I still overvalued him when it came to the draft because the production was very sporadic and was very random to me at times. They were broken plays, Lamar scrambling and then finding Marquis Brown. They weren't designed routes. Or I think the game against the Steelers, where he's kind of struggling all game. They were struggling connecting and then it's just a random sort of kind of bomb at the very end to make his numbers look great. Now let's fast forward to the playoff game. The playoff game to me is the first time I saw, wow, that is the guy that I want at the draft because he was the first option on a number of different plays where Lamar looked his way on a designed pass play. They weren't broken plays, there weren't scramble drills. He wasn't the second, third option, but it was a designed first read option. We're throwing the ball and getting the ball to Marquis Brown. And we saw the volume. We obviously know about his athleticism. So he's the guy that I'm, as far as my prep for next year, I'm locked in. Obviously, we all are, it's the playoffs, but I'm really locked in to see sort of kind of what he does, against the Buffalo Bills, obviously against a good corner, likely, obviously a better defense, but I'm more interested to see what that offense does in terms of, giving him the ball. Is he going to be the first read in a lot, on their pass plays? Is he going to get the volume that he got before? So that, again, kind of getting back to, the box score doesn't tell everything. It's really the plays and watching film and just kind of having an understanding of how a player got to X production. Yeah,
you can't believe a Trace McSorley 40-yard touchdown pass to Marquis Brown being replicable.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to see? So you watched the games this past weekend, the New Orleans Saints versus Chicago Bears. Did you watch the regular version, or did you get a chance to see the Nickelodeon themed NFL playoff game? And what did you think of it?
I heard about that. No, I watched the regular version. Yeah. Okay. Although I had my son with me, I probably should have considered. Maybe I could have, because he's not into football at all. Maybe that would have finally got him watching. But how was it?
It was hilarious.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I was able to kind of go back and watch snippets or little recordings, and I think they did a really good job with it. So let's dig into FFPC and specifically strategy and team management. So we've already answered question 1 here. Next question is, do you only participate in the FBG tournament, or do you also partake in the main event?
I did do the main event this year as well. I think I had about 6 teams. 4 of those made the playoffs. 3 of those made the large field tournament, but they were all duds as far as really being able to make noise. That tournament is obviously a bit harder. It's obviously higher stakes. You would assume the competition's a little bit tougher, and all the drafts are towards the end of the year, and people really aren't in the business of overreaching just to try and differentiate or trying to diversify teams. You really just want to try to get as good a team as you can. So value in those leagues, I think, was a little bit tough, at least in the drafts that I did, because I did go back and look at kind of the draft board to see things that I could have done a little bit better. But probably the same reasons that allowed me to win the FFPC probably killed me in the main, because I think I had 3 shares of Zeke. And at once, I think it was 1 share where I was just like, what, I should probably go Kamara here. But I was like, what, I'm doing a few more. I probably have my chance at him a little bit later, and I didn't. So that hurt me there. But outside of that, those were, really the only large field tournament and high stake leagues that I did this year.
Had Dak not gone down, though, this could be a completely different conversation, because
absolutely,
I think that Zeke was on pace to even outscore Kamara at the beginning of the year, and with that offense and how explosive it was, and the amount of points that this offense was putting up week in and week out, this offense took a complete 180 once Dak was injured and was out, and then they lost key pieces on their offensive line, and what has carried them through year in and year out became their Achilles heel, quite frankly. And so
yeah, I'm interested to see where he falls next year. I think he may be a steal, to be honest. I'm always looking for that little bit of edge. Who's the guy everyone's down on? Who's the guy everyone's high on? And let me try to adjust accordingly. But yeah, I mean, in the main, I had a team that was Zeke. I started off Zeke, Eckler, and Chubb, I believe. And so, I mean, right off the bat, and of course it never ends up working this way, but right off the bat, I was like, this team is going to win it. Yeah. This team is going to take down the main. Nope, that team didn't even make the playoffs. So, yeah. So it's always interesting to see what the NFL year unfolds.
Yeah, you would think preseason that would be a winning squad.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, even going into the tournaments, I joke around. I'm like, you could literally have someone create a 16-man roster, 20-man roster if you wanted, and have them handpick any player they wanted, no salary cap, not based on ADP. You could literally have whoever you want. And in the end, because it's just based on 3 weeks of somewhat random production, waiting for that random guy to kind of go off, you could end up losing. I think we all forget that there was a time period where we were kind of worried about Kamara. We were worried about Kamara and Taysom Hill taken away from Kamara and not checking the ball down or taking some of the goal line carries. And so
started on Taysom Hill.
Say what?
Yeah. Billy's had like 5 straight podcasts where he's gone off on Taysom Hill. So maybe don't say that. He who shall not be named on this podcast.
So I took down one FFPC main event league. I would have won the second because I needed 12 points between Kamara and Lockett, and I got 8 on week. So it was, lo and behold, Taysom Hill's fault. And the next week I put up like 240 and would have won hands down. So Taysom Hill cost me 2 FFPC main event leagues because all 3 made playoffs, and in both those leagues I had Kamara, and both those leagues were tight, and both those leagues I ended up taking either second or third, winning one, but it was primarily Taysom Hill's fault.
I want to give some insight to the listeners, some insight into the mind of addicts such as ourselves, and probably the others who are listening to. It's Christmas Day, and we're watching the Saints. We're watching Alvin Kamara just put together, one of the greatest fantasy performances of all time. He's at 5 TDs, and I want more. So what happens? They're at the 1.
And they put it.
He's on the sideline, and I'm like, why is he on the sideline? Don't you know this is a record? He has 5 TDs. Let's get him 6. They call timeout. They're getting ready to put him back in. Nope. Taysom Hill up the middle. I'm literally like cursing at the TV. He scored 5 TDs already, and I'm cursing at the TV because Taysom Hill bolstered him on his 6th TD. That's how insane we are. We just want more.
He should have ended up getting his 6 later, but he should have had 7.
He should have had 7. Correct.
He should have had the touchdown record in the NFL. But no, Sean Payton wants to get cute, and he wants to direct snap it here to the $15 million hybrid player who's not even a quarterback. And yeah, I'm going to rant here again, Bradley. 6 podcasts in a row on Taysom Hill.
Is there a mute button on my end? I don't know. I don't have the controls over here. Oh, no.
All right. So how does somebody win the FFPC FBG championship? Not once, but twice. Walk us through it. And is there, of course, there's a lot of skill involved to it. Is there a bit of luck? What from the driver's standpoint, what do you think it takes to get there?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. There has to be some skill there. I think the skill factor basically plays in terms of getting teams into the tournament. Okay. There is a just sort of kind of a grinding, hard work, spending a ridiculous amount of time, like we've already talked about and alluded to in terms of watching film, going over stats, reviewing whatever analytics may be available to you, listening to coaches post game, trying to get whatever advantage, whatever advantage we can get. So there's a lot of time and effort that kind of goes into, the draft prep and then the start and sit decisions. But yeah, once you kind of get in the tournament, obviously, you still got to determine, start sets. And sometimes that can be tough depending on the team. But the luck factor that comes in is you need that guy who's going to have his career year. You may only need him on one team, but you just need that guy because there's going to be somebody every year that's just going to go nuts one of the weeks or maybe 2 weeks. So you need that guy, and then you just need to be able to try to avoid as many duds as possible. But you get that guy, you get a couple other guys who kind of overperform, and that puts you there. So having the right combination is key. I think the first time that I won was definitely quite a bit of luck, kind of realizing what I know now. I had 15 teams then, and I was fortunate. I was I had Lamar, and I was high on Lamar, and he took 15 or 12 of those 15 to the playoffs. So I had 12 of those into the tournament. So I had 12 teams and 12 bullets in the tournament, and was just fortunate and won. But kind of knowing what I know now, it's probably hard to just have 12 teams, in a large field tournament with 8,000 other teams and hope that you have the right combination. Because you don't know, we don't know. It's a random guess. I don't know, And the funny thing is you just kind of think about the players on your roster, but really it's the players that aren't on your roster that make all the difference. I didn't start Kittle until the last week of the season, but I had Logan Thomas the first 2 weeks. I would have had some really tough lineup decisions and may not have started Logan Thomas if I had Kittle. And if you can recall, he went off, really the last 3 weeks of the season, but he had a game where he had, in the tight end premium league, he had double-digit targets and over 100 yards. That's huge getting that type of production. So I was kind of forced, into playing him. Same thing when Zeke went down. How often does Zeke get injured? He missed one game this year, and he missed it at the right time. I luckily had Tony Pollard, and like most of us in high stakes, you hang on to these high priority handcuffs, and I had him at the right time. And then Benny Snell, I have James Conner. So I think anyone who owned James Conner towards the back half of the year, you were hoping that, well, I shouldn't say that. You never hope for injuries, but it was ideal. You were fortunate if he was out because you got to start Snell. And if Snell was out, you'd probably be fortunate in that you get to start Conner. One person sort of kind of dominating the backfield touches as opposed to, playing sort of kind of the guessing game. So it was, the right combination of events. Obviously Kamara going off, Stephon Diggs. Being able to kind of have that stack with Josh Allen to finish things off Monday night. Fortunate series of events.
So how many teams did you end up submitting this year?
So I think in the football guys, I had about 68 teams. And I think about 2/3 or so of those made the playoffs. I think about a little under half of those made the tournament. So I had a number of bullets that I, got to fire off in hopes, again, having that right combination to end up with the most points accrued over 3 weeks.
So let's break down your roster here. I'm going to pull up your roster here so that the viewers see it. You got to get a separate window up here and share screen. And here we go. Okay. So for the viewers here, let me pull this up. I'm not going to be able to see you guys. So let's rock. So your starting roster here at the end, is this your final week roster?
I believe so. Let me put the glasses on for this.
So we have Josh Allen here. We have Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard, Deontay Johnson, Stephon Diggs. Okay, and I'm reading this for the people who are listening and not with us live here. Calvin Ridley, Benny Snell, Logan Thomas, Justin Tucker, Kansas City defense. And then on the bench, he's got Joey Sly, Ryan Tannehill, Jordan Reed, James Conner, George Kittle, Taysom Hill, Alexander Madison, DJ Chark. Bradley, do your song.
DJ Chark. Do.
Tyler Boyd and Kalen Blush. For all those with the kids, you'll appreciate Bradley's songs here. You touched base on this earlier. You had some really tough start-sit decisions week in, week out, looking at this roster. And for you, when you're making those decisions, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, I think start-sit is probably what I beat myself up on the most. And it's also probably what I learned the most. And I think that, to me, is where a lot of skill kind of comes into play. The draft, you can kind of get through a draft, and you can get lucky through a draft because you have an ADP right in front of you, and then sometimes things just fall into your lap. But that's one reason why I love FFPC. Being able to have a roster where you can draft 20 individuals that you want on your team, that you can kind of use at your disposal, that aren't just sitting on the waiver wire for someone who maybe didn't draft as well to just pick up week in and week out, I think is huge. And then also having the 2 flex positions to be able to construct your roster how you see fit and to be able to kind of, be fluid with it. Because again, I drafted from the 5th slot in this particular, for this particular team, and drafted Kamara, and tight end premium, I saw Kittle kind of fall to me. And I had questions there because ideally, I probably would have wanted to maybe go running back there. I usually like to go, start off, heavy running backs if possible, but couldn't pass up that value. But knowing that I can create a team where I can start up the 4 wide receivers. In my mind, I figured, okay, I have Kamara, I have my sort of kind of, stud. And really all I need is to fill out that second running back position, try and get a handcuff if I can, and then just try to acquire the players that are going to score me the most points. And as we kind of know, and this is probably true for most years, those mid-round running backs are tough to determine in terms of, who's going to hit, who's not, who's a dud, who's a stud. It's very hard, but there's often a number of different wide receivers in the PPR league that can get you, anywhere from 15 to 18 points, on average. And so I wanted to try to kind of maximize that, knowing I had a tight end that was just locked in. I had a running back or two that were just locked in, and then I can determine, okay, which wide receiver has the best, matchups based on, my review of film and the opposing defense, opposing schemes, things of that nature. And there's kind of a lot that kind of goes into that. So I spent a lot of time, determining what's the right start sit decision. And that's where the film kind of comes in, because it's not just, okay, what wide receiver is going up against what cornerback, what side is he going to be on? What's the defensive scheme? Are they a team that runs mostly zone? Can this wide receiver, find his way open in the zone, or is he better against man? What's the line situation of the team that he's playing on? Are they, they take a hit at their tackle positions? Are they not going to be able to, protect long enough for him to, get down the field? Is this a player that can sort of kind of find himself open underneath? So there's kind of a lot of the things that kind of go into that. And so obviously, the injury early on, with Jacksonville and their quarterback, Gardner, for me, DJ Chark ended up sitting a lot of weeks on the bench because I just felt like there was a lot of unknown. And I was fortunate that Diggs, who's a big question mark, showed up very early on and, allowed me to kind of have that confidence just to kind of leave him in, week in and week out. So a lot that kind of goes into that. But yeah, start and sits are tough. They're very tough.
So you talked about some of the drafts being really late. Do you prefer to draft late, like August, September, or are there some drafts that you also do like earlier in June or July?
I like both, to be honest. I think early on, I like to get in and number one, just kind of get my feet wet. I tend to draft throughout the season, but especially when news hits, I think it's just something I'm just, an addict. A news hits and I'm like, especially if I don't think that people are really paying attention or really kind of can figure out the right angle, or I feel like I have a unique angle that I can play on that situation, I'll try to draft so I can take advantage of that. But I like drafting early on more so because I feel like it's before everyone's kind of settled in as far as groupthink. It's before ADPs have really kind of found, where they're going to be, right before the season starts. And there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of shift. It can be tough because obviously injuries occur during the off season. Players get cut, players get added, and that kind of changes things to some degree. But I like getting in because I feel like, you've kind of watched the entire season, you've watched the entire playoffs, you follow off-season news, and it doesn't have to be super intense. And, if you, I lean on a friend as far as some of the college guys coming in, because I'm not a big college football guy in terms of watching every single game. So I lean on a close buddy of mine for that. But if you kind of, do your due diligence through the offseason, you should be good and ready to go at the very beginning. And you should probably be ahead of the game when it comes to drafting some of the guys, and just kind of ignore the draft site's ADP and go off of, kind of your own personal rankings.
So real quick, before we continue on to the draft, I'm going to pull up your team here, but I just want to let all the listeners know that are watching live here, if you do have any questions for Abib here on his draft on the FFPC, or just to pick his brain, or any for Bradley and I and the Fanalist, feel free to type them into whatever platform that you are watching the show from, and we can literally click them. They'll pop up here on the screen. We can get those answered for you. So let's pull up your draft here. The next question is what position in the draft did you draft your winning team from? And did you have a certain strategy heading into this draft, knowing your position?
I'm going to answer that question in just a quick second. I got to take a quick phone call. I'm super sorry. On call tonight. I just got to answer this in 2 seconds. Sorry about that, guy.
That's fine. So while he's taking that phone call, let's take a quick look here at Abib's team. He drafted the 5 slot, and we have Alvin Kamara as his first pick. We have George Kittle here at pick 2, James Conner at pick 3, Calvin Ridley at pick 4, DJ Chark at pick 5, Stephon Diggs, which is, I think, one of the biggest picks he's made in this draft.
It's crazy that Chark went that a round ahead of Diggs, but that's where he was going.
Yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty, and you and I both had even Diggs with a lot of uncertainty in the offense.
40.
Yeah,
yikes, big whiff.
Yeah, and then we have Tyler Boyd in round 7, Deontay Johnson in round 8, Alexander Madison in round 9, Tony Pollard in round 10, Josh Allen round 11. Another screaming value there. Benny Snell in round 12. Round 13, we have Jerick McKinnon. Round 14, we have Chris Thompson. Round 15, Justin Jackson. Round 16, Brian Edwards, which was kind of a hot commodity back towards the end of the draft. People thought he could take off and be, their deep threat once they lost Tyrell Williams.
Well, all of Twitter lost their minds when he was compared to Devontae Adams in the preseason. Okay, slow down.
Slow your roll. Then we have Logan Thomas, round 17, Bradley's former deep cut of the week. And we have his second quarterback here, Ryan Tannehill, week 18. And then week 19, perfect timing, Abib. 19, we have kicker Ryan Suckup. And then round 20, Tampa Bay defense, which was a top-tier defense this year as well, especially in the run. So walk us through this draft. Were there any snipes? You get sniped here. Did you not get sniped? Did you snipe anybody else? Walk us through it.
I definitely got sniped. I'm going to pull this up too. Just my eyesight is terrible. But obviously, starting off with Kamara, I don't think that was a hard decision. He was actually a guy that I was fairly high on, and somehow just did not get as many shares as I loved, but luckily got it on the team that really needed him. And then kind of coming back around in the second round, again, the FFPC is a tight end premium league. So him falling to the mid to late second round doesn't occur very often, especially, after the news that Debo was going to be out for a few. I think his ADP rose a few spots. So it was nice kind of getting him there. But, in terms of getting sniped, I think I would have had a tough decision if Eckler was there. And, I have a couple of Kittle teams, but I was very high on Austin Eckler. So I think it would have been hard for me to pass on Austin Eckler. So whoever drafted in the 6th slot, thank you. And then coming back around in the 3rd round, again, like we talked about. So since I took a tight end there, I really wanted to shore up the running back position. So I went James Conner. I was fairly high. 2 guys that I was really high on in the 3rd and 4th rounds this year, and that was James Conner and Chris Carson. And those guys started off strong. I think if there's one lesson to be learned, you got to be careful with some of these running backs who obviously have injury histories as far as these large field tournaments, because you really kind of need the guy to be strong towards the back end of the season. And, for me, I think again, kind of going back to watching film, we saw this weird transition in Pittsburgh, and maybe this was going on for a couple of years now, where they just could no longer run block. I mean, their run blocking was just non-existent. I don't think it was just just the fact that they became a passing team. I just felt like they could not run block to save their lives. And I felt like they just could not adjust to that either, whether it was the OC Fickner or, Ben calling the plays. There was just no rhythm at all. Usually a passing team will create a situation to where, okay, now we can, have a few draws, maybe a few dump offs to the running back, some screen play, but there was just none of that. It was really just, all let's get it out to the wide receivers as quick as possible. So I personally, I was wrong on the James Conner pick. He started off well, but obviously ended up being, a dud.
So we like to say here, the process was right, though. And there's several times that analysts or players such as ourselves where the process of breaking down film or the process of breaking down the analytics is correct, but it just didn't happen to play out that way. And so I'd say your process was correct there. They're gonna throw the ball a lot. They're gonna spread the field. They're gonna create running lanes, and they're gonna keep defenses honest. And in theory, that's what should have happened, but they just didn't run the ball like they should have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you would have told me that Ben would have threw as many times as he threw this year, I would have thought that exact same thing. Oh, this is great. Defenses are going to be, focused on the pass. This should, plenty of open running lanes. But yeah, so I guess coming back, down, to the fourth round, Calvin Ridley. This is one of the rare instances where he was available in the fourth period, and then this late in the fourth. And I wasn't high on Calvin Ridley. I wasn't low on him either, but his ADP was, I think it was appropriate. It was, he was going in the third round. And for me, I think there were other guys that I think I was a little bit higher on than he was, just given that he wasn't necessarily the true 1A. But this is just an example where you just got to take advantage of, guys who could potentially, be league winners who fall. You got to take advantage of the value. You can't pass up on that value. And the guys that, came after him, obviously, you can kind of, see that wasn't necessarily the hardest decision in the world to pick him there. And then the fifth round, DJ Chark, he was another guy that I was very high on. I was, really kind of hoping for that next year leap. And I thought Gruden was going to come in and really kind of make him the alpha dog in that, in that wide receiving core. He, anytime I hear an offensive coordinator talk about, oh, I really like this guy, we're going to move him around. That to me, I'm like, what? You're going to move him around? Oh, he's getting targets, So I thought, he's a guy who, obviously can make the big plays, but you add in volume. To me, that seemed like an easy guy to target in the fifth round, and he didn't work out as well as we thought. And then you can see the guys that I passed on there, DK Metcalf and Darren Waller, who didn't perform as well. But this is where the luck factor comes in. If I would have had DK, and maybe, well, if I would have had Waller, I probably would still won. But if I would have had DK Metcalf, those last 3 weeks, he was not, performing, at what he was. So yes, you could say that, okay, you made a mistake there, but it ended up being a good mistake because I didn't have to start him in my lineup and take some of those subpar performances. So it worked out there. And then the sixth round, this is really where I think
this is where you won the draft.
Exactly. This is where I won the draft, getting Stephon Diggs. And it wasn't, a position in my mind where I was like super high on Stephon Diggs and he was a 6th round target for me. Really, my target here was actually Will Fuller. I was very high on Will Fuller, Deshaun Watson, and Brandon Cooks because especially early on, I mean, their ADPs were in the 8th, 9th, 10th round. I mean, I was just gobbling them up everywhere I could, so I just became very high. And I believed in Will Fuller, the talent. So, and you take risk with injuries and things like that. And so I figured if I can get 10 full games of Will Fuller, I'll take it. And we got, almost a full season, but, it wasn't injuries that got him. It was probably what prevented him from getting injuries that got him. I don't know, but that's a story for another day. And then 7th round, Tyler Boyd, obviously, I think he was, he kind of found his spot in the 7th round. So that was kind of, again, based on this particular team, I think it's something that, I noticed in a lot of drafts that I think many people don't really focus on. I form the thing that I want to accomplish first is having a roster that I can start week in and week out without any issues. So I want a team where I have starters that can play. So rather than passing on Tyler Boyd and then going with like a upside running back, I don't know, like a Zach Moss or something like that. I don't know if I can start Zach Moss, comfortably for the first few weeks of the season. I know I can plug Tyler Boyd. He may have some down performances, but I know he's going to get target. I know that Bengals defense is not very good. I know they have an upgraded quarterback, and I know he plays in the slot, so I know he's going to get volume in a PPR league. So to me, that seemed like a guy that, maybe not the hugest upside, but a guy that, was going to provide me a safe floor.
Well, there was also the rookie factor and COVID and not getting the reps that normal rookies get and not being able to have the preseason that, acquaints rookies to the speed of the NFL. And there was a lot of question marks. And we talked about this several times in the podcast and really trying to touch our listeners about, not trusting in rookies for the first half of the season this year because it's not your traditional season. And with COVID, things are going to be delayed. And yes, there's always outliers like CeeDee Lamb and others. But, in terms of the running back position, in terms of, even the quarterback position and in tight end position, where those positions are hard to learn in the NFL, and that development takes more time to sit here and take a player like that over Tyler Boyd. I think you're correct. You have to go for the for sure production here, especially in a big size tournament like this.
100% agree. 100% agree. Like, my whole thing is I want to get into the tournament. Okay. And so that's why I didn't take Jonathan Taylor. And we can look back and say Jonathan Taylor finished very strong, but it's not just the fact that, okay, yes, we all know that he's a beast. We all know that he's going to be very good in this league. He's going to be a good running back in this league behind a very good O-line. We'll see what that happens next year. We heard about the retirement today, but we'll see. But we knew he was a good running back. But like you said, him being a rookie, and we forget that Marlon Mack, that first game, looked very good.
He did.
Because he's familiar with that O-line. He's familiar with that scheme. And he tore his Achilles and he was out. And that really kind of opened the door for Jonathan Taylor. But still, even then, it took him a while.
It was the Jordan Wilkins show and Nyheim Hines.
Yeah, exactly. So you had to wait kind of how long. But for teams that were able to kind of get him at value, or create a roster where you were able to sort of kind of weather that storm, it probably paid off towards the long run. But like you said, it's hard. Maybe Jonathan Taylor isn't the greatest example of that, but it's hard to pick out which rookies are going to do well. I mean, how many people were high on Jerry Jeudy? How many Twitter videos of Jerry Judy's feet did we see? If I saw another route, a phantom route run by Jerry Jeudy on Twitter, I was going to explode. But yeah, it's hard to kind of pick those guys out. So that was tough.
It was Jerry Jeudy and AJ Green were the only two players since 2017 to have over 100 targets and under 50% reception percentage. Insane. Which is like,
yeah, absolutely.
So I think it'd be a prime example of what you're discussing here is. Look at the round 4 here. Someone chose Akers over Ridley, and they were going for that explosive rookie pick that was going to set themselves aside and differentiate themselves from the rest of the tournament. Well, it ended up biting them, right? Because we saw Darrell Henderson early on. We saw Malcolm Brown early on, and it was kind of this, rotational backfield, and Calvin Ridley exploded. And so when you have guaranteed production versus someone like that in a rookie early rounds, especially, I 100% agree with you. You have to go with the for sure thing. Yeah. One could argue that, hey, you want to differentiate yourself and you want to go for that explosive play to really set yourself aside. But I think that there's a certain amount of conservativeness as well as risk involved. But I think that you have to err on the side of conservativeness when it comes down to your first early picks, at least.
And setting that core of guaranteed points, as you were talking about earlier, they could be duds. They could be zeros, like Leonard Fournette sharing the backfield with Ronald Jones. We didn't know how that was going to shake out for a long time. So for them to be early picks, that's much riskier than picking even a Terry McLaurin. He went after Leonard Fournette.
And the thing too is just in these tournaments, you almost want to just err on the side of caution. Yeah, you want to get someone who is, who's explosive, who's a good athlete, who's going to be able to, make it through the entire year. But like you said, you really want to be able to create a core of guys that you can fill in, on a given week during buys or during injuries that is not going to give you a zero or give you, a single-digit performance. But I think we also we overestimate the idea of upside, I think, is just used in a very non-productive way. Almost any player can have upside. I always go back to Danny Amendola. For whatever reason, I don't know why this example sticks out in my mind. There was a game last year, and I was listening to some analyst on Sirius XM, and he's kind of going over his DFS prediction, and he was like, no, you need, for this particular tournament, you need upside, and you don't want a guy like Danny Amendola. And not to throw this guy under the bus, because obviously we don't think of Danny Amendola as an upside play, but it was a week where everybody was injured, and he was probably going to be the second target, and they were going against a guy, a team that had a very bad slot corner, et cetera, et cetera. So, he ended up having a career game. He scored over 20 to 25 points. So from that moment on, I was like, okay, any player can have upside. Like, the idea that only one player can, or certain players can't perform at a elite level, I think is ridiculous. And we know that the NFL, there's tremendous amounts of parity. There's a number of different injuries that occur throughout, the season, where a guy like Tyler Boyd may become the number one and may, end up performing like a Stephon Diggs, et cetera.
So let's talk about player selection here. We had a chance to take a look at your draft. So how do you approach a draft? Do you do your own projections? And if so, do you use them? And you've kind of answered the next one too, kind of a three-part question here is, do you come to the tournament with certain players in mind? You mentioned that you had Will Fuller in mind here, but let's focus here on your approach in the draft and if you do your own projections.
I don't do my own projections, and I personally really don't use projections in general. I think stats are very important. I think all of it's important. Okay. I think, you can't, I'm not someone who says, okay, I just, watch film and I just get, and I'm in the same right. I'm not someone who just kind of uses analytics and, try and, figure out, based on some algorithm who's going to perform next. I think it's all very important. As much information as you can get and get through, I think it can only help if you know how to use it correctly. What I try to do is I try to go more based off of rankings. I think, to me, stats and projections are kind of more of a retroactive way of looking at a player's outcome, if that makes sense. For instance, and maybe it's more so with analytics, but I'll oftentimes, I saw a recent, analytic article over which teams you should be targeting for your playoff leagues. Okay. And prior to kind of reading through this article, which is a very good article, very well done, I had already in my own mind, whether it was right or wrong, in my own mind determined, okay, which were the top tier teams, which were sort of kind of the middle tier teams in terms of, questionable making to the next round and which ones were unlikely. And so kind of going through this long article, it basically arrived at the same position. We all have this information. And it's nice, yes, to have, data to sort of kind of confirm these things. But for the most part, I think if you watch film and, you sort of kind of, follow along as far as, the offseason and signings and things of that nature, you understand the coordinators and schemes and players. I think you can arrive to projections, and maybe it helps out some. But for me, I think it confuses the overall picture. If I see a projection of a guy who's slated to project out at 210 points versus 200 points, and now I need to move him up my rankings, I would almost just rather kind of ignore that. And it took me some time to kind of get to that point. I actually had a very long argument with a friend who was just like, projections are BS. And so I hope he's not listening, because I've kind of come full circle to his sort of kind of thought process. Because I think now I understand more so. I think they are helpful, though. It's helpful to kind of get context. But for me, it's more so kind of based on like where I have a player ranked. And I will, whether it's smart or not, I'll, understanding the format, understanding that, okay, I need these next 3 weeks, or I need the last 3 weeks of the season to be the explosive weeks. And early on in the off season, I'll try to get as much data as I can to look at a defense and determine, okay, is this going to be an easy defense or hard defense? And I know that changes throughout the year, but I don't want to just completely ignore that situation. I was kind of high on Derrick Henry because I looked at his end of the year schedule and I was like, this guy's probably going to go off, and so you do that with certain players. Some certain players, it doesn't matter. Alvin Kamara didn't matter. I'm going to take him regardless. But other players, I'll kind of look at their end of the year schedule and, think to myself, okay, does this player roll? And I'll kind of use that more so than if one player projects slightly over the other.
So you touched base on this a little bit. Do you avoid week 12 buys altogether in the FFPC with players, or are you okay targeting those players, or do you typically stray away?
I probably stay away at their ADP. Chris Godwin wasn't someone I was super high on this year, I think, but because he was maybe his ADP fluctuated quite a bit, but for the most part, I saw him going kind of in the mid to late second rounds, and I just didn't necessarily feel all that comfortable given the targets there. But there were times where Mike Evans fell to the fourth. So at that point, I'm not going to pass him up in the fourth round, and I'm going to take Mike Evans. I I wasn't passing on Christian McCaffrey at number 1 overall. So and he had a late season bye. So for the most part, with the exception of a few guys, yes, but I think about it, but not it. And for instance, like the quarterback, at the quarterback position, you can kind of get away. If you're high on Tom Brady, you can get away with having another quarterback to fill in that slot. But other guys, it's a little bit harder. So I think, if I got to pay cost for that player at a certain position, I'm probably going to fade and stay away, especially if there's a light player. But if it's a guy like CMC who can potentially, lap the field in projections, I'll take my chances that I can somehow get into the tournament, whether it's by having the best record, having the most points overall, or somehow still winning in the playoffs to get into the final tournament so that I can have probably one of the few teams that was able to make it with CMC, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
and for those real quick, Bradley, I'll let you go off here. Is those unfamiliar, week 12 is the first week of playoffs in the FFPC, and it's head-to-head. And so it's essential, it's vital that you win, because in order for you to proceed and enter the tournament, unless you took first in regular season, it's a do or die game. So hence the importance of the question of whether he fades or he targets players in week 12.
Yeah, that's a big one. There was a league I was in, and week 13 this past year was the buys of Carolina and Tampa, and I had Evans and McCaffrey and Vaughn. And I was like, and there's the 32-team league. So it was like, these are my studs, and there's no depth behind me. So, oops. The buys are definitely something that we got to keep in mind for the playoffs for sure. Are there...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I avoided, like, if I drafted CMC, then I tried to avoid drafting, Godwin and doubling up on the week 12 bye.
Yeah. So you talked about the overvaluing of upside by a lot of fantasy players and tournament players. Like, is that the most common mistake that people make in this tournament? Or is there, like, what's the most common mistake, would you say, that that losers make?
I consider myself a loser because not all my teams won. So, I'll throw myself in there as well. I kind of just got to go from personal experience. Like, my teams that didn't do that well were teams where I either reached on certain players. I was pretty adamant about CEH not being, a top 5 back. Pre-Damien Williams opt-out, obviously, but also post. But yet, you got to kind of consider all realms of possibilities and, Andy Reid's system. So there are times where I would, drafted him. So, and I think there were times where I was just like, okay, I need to try to diversify, playing as many teams. And so I reached, and I think that was a mistake. And it's not just him necessarily, but any player, I think you can go and get your guy. There's going to get your guy. And then there's like really reaching. And I think if you're kind of, have a certain, thought process that you follow, and you're adamant that X player is not going to perform this year, then don't reach for him necessarily. Try and wait and acquire him when he falls to you. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. You can win with any players. You don't have to have a certain player to win, except for this year. You needed Kamara if you didn't have Kamara. but you don't know that. But I mean, like, so I don't necessarily think you have to go in thinking I need this player because he's got to win. At the end, when we look at all the projection, there are tiers, like X amount of players scored this amount of points, and you could have had any of those guys in the first round, and X amount of players scored X amount of points, and you could have had any of those guys in the second round. So I think you got to kind of keep your eyes open and try not to fall in love. But the biggest thing, I think we kind of talked about this earlier, is not drafting a team that you can start week 1 and feel comfortable about. Drafting a team where you're constantly trying to, you went for just all the upside. You went for all the Zach Mosses of the world, the Keyshawn Bonds. You went for the Jerry Judys, the CeeDee Lambs. All these quote unquote sexy picks, and you got all these guys on your team, and people look at this and say, "Oh, that team looks great." We all love posting our draft boards, and we say that team looks great. But then you get to week 1, and you're like, "Oh, who do I start?" Like who's going to be able to come in and give me, the points that I need?
So there's a saying I like to say, and you talked about sexy picks, and I say sexy isn't flexy, because you have to have some sort of flexibility here in these teams. And if you're drafting full upside and you're drafting teams that only have upside, you have no flexibility, and you have to be able to start a roster, like you said. And if you're throwing out rosters with those names at the beginning of the year, you aren't making the playoffs, let alone the tournament here. So I 100% agree to you. So let's move on to position theory. Do you approach each draft differently? Do you have a strategy depending upon where you draft, or are you strictly targeting players?
No, I'm very, very, I'll just adapt to the draft. I try not to go in with like a rigid strategy. If I'm drafting like, in the first top 3 or 4 or 5 picks, I'm pretty much assuming that I'm getting a running back. I have my top 5 running backs, and whoever falls, I'll just take. There are certain guys that I may avoid, especially because their ADPs is somewhat fixed. Michael Thomas was a guy that was, kind of a guy that I really did not want to draft this year at his ADP. And even in the background, I was very high on Devontae Adams, and I didn't predict Michael Thomas's injury. No one can predict injuries. But I just saw a situation where we have a healthy Kamara, who's guaranteed 80 plus targets, if not more, now that he's healthy. But that also means more running. You have Jared Cook, who's another year into the system. Again, tight end position, learning the offense, learning Drew Brees. You got to figure he's going to probably, potentially see more targets. Emmanuel Sanders coming in. You had Traquan Smith, and you had all these guys. And then the biggest thing was Drew Brees being older, and the guy who we will not mention. So for me, I didn't want to draft him. But so for the most part, it's just, I had guys that I avoided, but otherwise I was just kind of fluid. If Kelsey fell to me towards the end of the back, the first round, which wasn't common, then I took that opportunity to try to get him at what I considered value. And then I think that also allows you, and especially in a large field tournament, to be able to create unique builds. If you got Kelsey in the second round, you were one of very few teams that accomplished that. So you may potentially have a very unique build compared to someone else. And so I try to take advantage of, values. I'm not a person who, or I wasn't a heavy tight end premium guy as far as trying to acquire those guys early on. I'm not afraid to admit I was kind of in the, okay, let me try to get Hurst or Higbee, whoever fell to me in the 7th. But I kind of kept my, eyes open. If Waller fell to late 5th, 6th, I'd pick him up. Kittle in this draft fell fairly late. I picked him up. I do think you need to make sure that you have a number of options at the tight end position because, again, you can flex them. And if you pick the right one, they can really, in this situation, win you a league. But yeah, you just got to be able to you got to be able to adapt to the draft. You never know what's going to happen. If you follow along on Twitter, at FFPC, there are plenty of people posting draft boards or situations where the unthinkable is done. Some guy drafts 3 QBs in a row, or reaches 5-6 rounds ahead of ADP, and certain teams end up with this amazing core roster. So you never know what can happen. You got to be able to adapt to that, I think.
So it looks like we had a question come in as we were talking about position theory. Are there any thoughts on, this is from Jason Stewie from Facebook, are there any thoughts on Tom Brady next year? Could he be a value pick given his age, but with a full year now under his belt in this system?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brady is sort of kind of one of those outliers that we talked about. Because if you ask me this question about Breeze, I'm staying away from Breeze. I mean, most of us stayed away this year. But Brady proves that he's in a high-powered offense, and he seems to have developed, a good grasp on that offense. As far as if he's going to be a value or not, I think it just kind of all depends on where he falls. In this particular format, you see quarterbacks kind of just go all over the place. And my thing was I tried to avoid as much as possible reaching on a quarterback. There are certain times where I was just like, okay, Lamar here late in the 3rd, I'll go, or I had a CH Tyreek Hill. I was like, all right, let me do the KC stack just for once. But for the most part, I just tried to, I was like, I'll wait on QB until I find value. Just like, I think in this draft, I was, fairly high on Josh Allen, and he was someone who was easy to sort of kind of get late. And I like to draft multiple QBs. So I think it's a position that, we hear wait, it's not important, you can draft, you can stream, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that is overly simplified. That position scores the most points for your team. Not every matchup is alike, and it's not necessarily that a team goes against a bad defense, but it may be a team that goes against a high-powered defense. So I know Tom Brady's Tom Brady, so he's going to put up points in certain situations regardless. But I know if he's playing the Kansas City Chiefs, they're likely going to be down at some point. And no matter how bad a game he had, he's going to somehow find a way to put up 3 TDs and 300 yards, So I want to be able to sort of kind of, adjust my QBs as needed, especially if I don't have one of those high-priced guys, which I tend not to have. So, he could be a value. I think it just kind of depends on where he goes.
To piggyback off what you said, you had mentioned something about people waiting on quarterbacks, or you waiting on quarterbacks, but quarterbacks kind of going all over the place. And I'm a firm believer now in, I do like to wait on quarterbacks because there's value, because you can always find someone like a Josh Allen later, or like in this year, I was able to get Aaron Rodgers in round 11 in most drafts. Mm-hmm. That being said, though, I think the NFL has changed, and the landscape has changed, and the fantasy landscape has changed to where there's these hybrid quarterbacks now, where traditionally with pocket passers, yes, you could wait on a quarterback because the difference between quarterback 5 and 15 are going to be minimal. But now with these hybrid quarterbacks, and especially with the elites like, Lamar and like early season Wilson and Kyler Murray, and to where, these players are putting up points on the ground as well as through the air, I think that's where the reach can happen. But I think if you miss out on those initial 3 to 5 quarterbacks, I think that's when you as a player have to say, I'm okay with getting somebody in the 10th, 11th round and taking a pocket passer and just, hoping for a career year, as if kind of like what you stated earlier with Josh Allen.
Yeah. And these guys, you're going to be able to find guys in the later round. I had tons of Tannehill. No one wanted to draft Tannehill. No one even wanted to draft Gardner Minshew. So there were plenty of drafts where I was just like, what? Like, okay, damn, I got sniped on Josh Allen, in the 9th round. I'll just wait, And I wasn't, I wasn't high on Aaron Rodgers. That was obviously a mistake, but I was just like, okay, if I can't get that guy, then I'll wait. I was really trying to target Deshaun Watson in the 8th round anytime I could, because again, that 8th round is kind of special because you've already drafted your full team likely, right? So I have my kind of core rosters, and in that 8th round, that's typically when like a lot of the higher price handcuffs start to get drafted. So I don't feel like I'm losing on a lot of value. And the handcuffs to me too, yes, they can be league winners, but they are definitely overdrafted. So I'll let that kind of initial run go. And there was a period in time before the Chase Edmonds news kind of caught fire. It's like, what's the difference between Chase Edmonds and Tony Pollard? Both will really need their starting running back to get injured, and you don't know which one's going to happen. So
it's about 50 points in the playoffs is what the difference is.
Yeah, but guessing injuries is tough. So I'll just take the one at the cheaper value and hope for it. Like the first handcuff that I drafted was Alexander Madison. Not only did he not perform the 1 week that he was that I needed him, he wasn't available during that 3-week span. He kind of came 1 week too late. But I drafted him early, but I could have just waited and drafted someone else. So that's always a tough one, because you really it is kind of a dart throw, and you do want that lottery pick, or that lottery ball to hopefully hit. But I try to grab the last guy of that group if possible.
So we've talked about finding the right guy in the draft. But the waiver wire is also really important about finding the right players who are not drafted. How much time do you spend weekly on sifting through the waiver wire? And do you believe in spending your fab like early or saving it closer to the end?
Yeah, I probably just can't help myself. I spend my fab early. I had like 60 to 70% Mike Davis. It was like, oh, lock button, and I spent like, I don't know, anywhere from, and I try to vary it too, because a lot of it depends on your roster. Your team may not need a Mike Davis, and if you just try to complicate your situation and start and sit, you're going to put yourself in a frenzy. And then when your team really does need help, you're not going to have the budget for it. So a lot of it's kind of based on like the overall roster. But yeah, if I need it, I'll spend it early. I spent like 80% of my budget on Mike Davis in some leagues, and he really kind of carried me at times that I needed to be carried. But I spent a lot of time definitely as far on waivers. And the key is, and I think we all know this, the key is to add that guy before he blows up or before he's needed. So you see like someone draft or drop Benny Snell, automatic easy lock button. I saw Gio Bernard he's another perfect, going back to the handcuff. I don't know why this seems to be my topic, but he was like the handcuff. Like I had so much Gio Bernard at the end because I just didn't understand. I was like, I don't understand why we are drafting Alexander Madison and such, in the 7th round. And then Gio gets drafted. Like I can get him in like the 19th round, or I can get Mike Davis in the 20th round.
Or off waivers.
Yeah, all off waivers. So anytime I saw someone drop those players, they were just automatic ads. So there were a number of guys like that. So I try to but I do spend a lot of time because for me, it's really like looking at each team individually and figuring out, okay, what's needed. Do I have to preserve my budget for this team? Is this a strong team where, my bench is strong, my, roster strong, I don't really need a lot? Do I need to add elsewhere? Is it a team where I can, do the unthinkable and add a second defense, or add a third quarterback? There are a lot of rules that I break that, people look at some of my rosters, they'll think that, I was probably the worst player in the world, But yeah, I spent a lot of time just because I approach each team differently. So I'm not going through and doing sort of kind of a mass ad of one player on every single team. And that I think really has kind of, helped me out quite a bit in terms of maximizing my rosters and maximizing my odds of winning.
So do you spend more time in the earlier waiver run on FFPC or the second run, which used to be Saturdays, now Sundays? Because I find that you can find a lot of value on Sunday morning, which used to be Saturday on the FFPC, because people have already gone through their ads for the week and they don't spend any more time on that second run.
Yeah, I probably spend about equal time on both. I think that's great. And I also, I don't know, this, again, the addict in me, I'll go look and see who was dropped. And then I'll kind of like note of that so that I know, okay, be aware. Because sometimes, especially, depending on how it's set, if it's set by points, a guy that may have had an ADP of 18th round is not going to show up, on your initial, screen unless you sort it by ADP or by percentage owned or something like that. So they're like kind of unique tricks like that I probably shouldn't be spewing over these airwaves. But yeah. Spending quite a bit of time on waivers is important. It's kind of all important. It's this team though, it was, it's kind of fortunate that I was able to kind of keep most of the players drafted and really didn't have to do a lot of ad drops. And that was probably because I drafted towards the later end of the season than the beginning.
All right. So one last question, and it's a personal one for me. I haven't played FFPC. This fall is going to be the first time that I play. What's your number one piece of advice for someone like me who's new to FFPC, new to the tournament, a new player? What's one piece of advice for someone like me?
Just enjoy it. No. I think, you really got to get just a good feel for the format. I think it's a very unique format. And I think, it's not even so much the tight end premium. Yeah, that's important aspect of it. But I think last year, I don't know, I think I had Tyler Higbee or somebody, and Tyler Higbee was obviously not Tyler Higbee last year. You can win in a variety of different ways. And George Kittle was injured for the majority of the season. So, but I think understanding the format, understanding what, 2 flexes, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs really means when it comes to roster construction, how you draft, how you build, and then just kind of getting a feel of the scoring week in and week out. To me, every league is a little bit different. You're going to have some leagues that just tend to be a little bit easier than most. And credit to the guys over at FFPC, but I love the way that it's set up from a fairness standpoint in terms of who makes the playoffs. Because I had a team where I was like 4-7, and I mean, you look at the points against, it was just like insane amount. But I scored the most points in that league. That team automatically got a bid to the, for the playoffs. And I think most points get you a bid, if I'm not wrong, to the
most points in first place.
Yeah, so it's it's a very, very format so that even if you are unlucky in a sense, you can still profit and win. But maybe start off, with some of the smaller leagues and I would try to get a few underneath your belt, like 5 or 6. And if you're just aggressive, just do it. I mean, you can get lucky like me, and maybe you only need 5 teams, and then one of those hits. But it's form, and then I would just kind of spread out the drafts. Have a set idea of how many drafts you want to do, and then just try to do them at various points, because I think it's an advantage that you can take, or something that you can take advantage of, knowing what's the best time to draft, because it may be different for you. Maybe you might be someone who doesn't spend as much time in the off season, and you spend all your prep at the very beginning. You may not want to draft then, because you may just sort of kind of not be used to the ADP and the drafting or the format itself.
So me personally, I do 3 main event teams, and I like to do 1 early draft, 1 mid draft, and 1 late draft. I like to space it out because you can find value everywhere, and especially in the early drafts, if you do your research, getting Deontay Johnson around 10-11 is a massive, I should say, it's a big step forward on the teams that are taking him in round 7 and 8 later in the drafts. Or like I was telling Bradley during our other podcast, being able to draft, Ronald Jones in round 10s and 11s in the beginning of the year, and then him falling later to 8s, 9s again, to where I think that you can really space out your drafts and get value in each places. But the number one piece of advice that I have for new players coming in FFPC is you cannot make 0 fat bids. There's the first year I ever played FFPC, I blew my wad early thinking, oh, it's okay. I'm a master at finding value. I'll be able to place 0 bids and get whoever I need. And no, that's not the scenario. So my very first year FFPC, I think I ran out of fab money like week 8, thinking that I could make 0 fab bids. And here I was from week 8 on, not being able to make any roster moves, which, as you can imagine, that team failed miserably. And so I'm the first to admit that is make sure you read all of the stats inside and out in terms of how the league operates, all the details with every league that you join, because that is one major piece that I missed. And, had I just been able to simply add a kicker one week, we're talking about a playoff spot. So make sure
to piggyback off of that, if you do find yourself likely making the tournament, make sure you also add a second kicker, because last year I had the Dallas kicker, and somehow, some way, he got cut during, he got cut at week 13. So for 3 weeks, I didn't accrue any kicker points. I got lucky, and obviously, and that team was able to kind of win it all. But sweating bullets and not having a kicker, made it a little bit closer than it should have been. So, potentially adding a second kicker if you make a tournament, that's something that most people don't think about, but you never know.
And even a defense in COVID years, right? Look at the Raiders that week where they thought everybody was going to be out. And you don't want to start a defense where 9 of 11 players are going to be out in that given week. They're going to get torched. So I think this year, especially COVID, created a lot of unusual circumstances and realistically created a lot of unique builds and unique waiver acquisitions throughout the year.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank you again, Abib, for joining the Fantasy Football Fanalyst Show and enlightening us with your FFPC knowledge. For those listening and watching, make sure to follow Abib on Twitter at Skywalka. That's SKYWALKA 2000. And before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I just want to say thank you to you guys for having me on. This was awesome. I love anytime I get to talk fantasy, definitely one of my passions. And I just want to say just thank you to everyone. I mean, anyone who's on Twitter, within the fantasy community, everyone's just sort of kind of been great throughout the year, not even just after the winning. So it's just been a very awesome experience when it was very, very much needed. So I just want to thank everyone. Yeah.
Well, that is a wrap, folks. Thank you for joining us on our second ever live show. That's right. We have a show now. We're not just a podcast. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at FFFanalysts, at W_Muzio, at FFStalder, and Abib here at Skywalker2000. You can also follow us on Facebook, or like us on Facebook, I should say, at Fantasy Football Fanalysts. And as of last week, we added a YouTube channel and Twitch channels, which are also all listed as FF Fanalysts. Don't forget, we created a website, and it is up and running at www.fanalysts.com. That's FFanalysts with an S.com. It's been getting loaded with resources, articles, DFS plays, and we'll soon have rankings for both the FFPC, Dynasty, IDP, and Redraft here shortly. We hope you enjoyed the show tonight. We'll see you all back here Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for tuning in, and good night.